My working definition of leadership is the attempt to leave the people and the world around us better than when we found it. And that is both micro, with every single interaction we have, and macro.
What if leading wasn't only about getting things done efficiently and effectively? What if it was also about leaving the people around us better than we originally found them? I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from Shedletzky. As an author, speaker, and coach, Shed, as he is affectionately known, is passionate about leadership and organizational culture. Like many people, he was deeply impacted by Simon Sinek's Golden Circle concept, which inspired the book Start With Why. But unlike most everyone, Shed didn't leave it at that. He wanted more, and that more eventually made him the fourth hire ever in Simon Sinek's organization. He eventually became the company's head of training and product development, where he managed a team of world-class communicators and himself delivered hundreds of keynote talks and workshops. Today, Shed has his own company focused on, that's right, you guessed it, leadership and culture. In 2023, he released his book, Speak Up Culture, which addresses the exceptional performance and engagement created when leaders truly, deeply, and authentically listen. In today's episode, you'll hear why the words better and attempt are particularly important to Shed. You'll also get a chance to hear Shed's perspective on the value of always keeping the long view front of mind as a leader. And you'll learn the 3 words that Shed and one of his trusted colleagues discovered that describes every exceptional leader. But first, we get to hear the amazing story of how Shed's grandfather survived the Holocaust and how that inspires Shed's work to this day. Here we go.
My grandfather's a Holocaust survivor. It's the next book I'm working on is writing his memoir. Working title is Book of Ben. And the reason I mention him is because he was drafted to the Polish army in 1937, fought in 39 when Germany invaded, hid his Jewish identity when he was captured as a prisoner of war, and then ended up being tapped on the shoulder by a more senior Polish officer saying, "Hey, do you want to escape? We have an escape plan." And he was a very gregarious, very well-liked individual, which was helpful and also conspiring to keep his Jewish identity hidden, which is convenient during the Holocaust. And he escaped that prison, walked home for about 7 or 8 weeks at night only, married my grandmother, his childhood sweetheart, Eva, and then he had too close of a relationship to what it meant to be an SS guard. So when they said, everyone hop in these trains and we're sending you off to a better place, which was either going to be working camps or the Warsaw Ghetto, he went, nah, I am not doing that. Just as any sort of entrepreneur would say, nope, like it's cunning. Cunning is that attribute, and he had that. And so he ended up leading a group of 7, which included great aunts and uncles of mine and others. I need to get some of the details right on who was that group of 7. And by the end, it was a group of 5, and he had to give away his firstborn child. They aligned a Polish family to take the firstborn, and it didn't pan out. And so I literally wouldn't exist if it weren't for his leading a group of 7, which became 5, in hiding in the Polish countryside.
Wow.
Because he was a butcher. He knew all the farmers in the area. Like, I literally wouldn't be here if it weren't for his leadership and his legacy. So I view it as my responsibility to live a life courageously that honors his legacy. In fact, when I quit so I was fired from my first corporate job, some nice little George Costanza behavior, which is my mug. Our friend David Mead got me this one. And so my first corporate gig, I was let go for mentoring interns who turned down full-time job opportunities, citing conversations with me because it wasn't the best place to work at the time. My first day at that job, 1,000 people were let go post-merger, so it was a tumultuous environment. My second job, I quit. It was a good, stable management consulting job. And I got a call from my grandfather, Zaidi Ben. He was 95 at the time. And he said, "What are you doing? You're throwing away your life. Do you know how much I sacrificed to give you and your family? And I went, I'm following in your footsteps. I said, you worked for somebody else for your life for 6 months when you came to this country and worked for another butcher just to learn the ropes. Willie Martin was his name, Willie Martin. And I said, I want to go the road less traveled. I want to be an entrepreneur just like you. I'm doing this for you and because of you, not in spite of you." And that shut him up. And he said, "Fine, just don't sell drugs." And I went, I'm not gonna sell drugs. So that's the origin story. I had a great professor at business school, Dr. Dennis Shackle, who gave me an experience of what fulfillment is, right? Using our strengths, of which we all have strengths, to contribute towards something bigger than ourselves. Working with Simon, and he's had some great leaders on his team over the years that have really shown me what it means to lead, not perfectly, but what it means to lead and the obligation and responsibility of leadership and how to live what we preach from the inside out and own up to mistakes when we don't get it right because we're human. Yeah, so those are, I think, the biggest influences, I would say.
In as much as we start our discussions with our guests with this question every time, I do not think that we've heard a story as dramatic as that. So it's amazing to have that as a legacy. Does it ever feel like pressure in terms of how you see it, or does it feel more like opportunity?
I mean, the words that come to mind are gratitude, like a calling or an obligation. And it is, having him as my grandfather, unfortunately, because his story of survival was, and why I think his story through the Holocaust is so interesting, is I think he's one of very few survivors who actually very much authored his own destiny. Seldom are the stories of we actively went into hiding and didn't go through the camps and the working camps and the concentration camps. So he was very willing to talk about his stories, and he would share it with anyone who would listen. So there were countless dinners. I would just hear the stories always. And in fact, when I graduated from university, the first thing I did is I spent a full day with him and I said, go. And I recorded his story, like a full sort of 8 hours of tell me from the beginning and tell me everything. And he was very willing to do that. So he's since passed. He passed away in August 2015, so just over 10 years ago. And no, it isn't pressure. It is responsibility, opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. So special. So special.
Thank you.
So here we are with the topic: leadership coming through family, university professors, people like Simon Sinek. What is leadership from your perspective?
So this has been an area that I've been really intrigued in recently and have had an evolution of thinking. I used to say that there are good leaders and there are bad leaders. And I'm like, who am I to be holier than thou, to be the one who gets to judge and decide? So a couple things. A, the only requisite of leadership is followers. If people are following, you are leading, at least for them, right? And there are people who we might follow temporarily or transactionally or for a period of time or a project. There are also people that we might follow sustainably and across dynamic situations. Those are more enduring, consistent leaders. And so I sort of thought, well, hang on a second. There's so much literature and definitions, and throw an adjective in front of leadership: human leadership, maternal leadership, servant leadership. Really? Can't there just be leadership? It's hard to do any job well without a job description. So I've endeavored to go, okay, can we land on a working definition and then even on some of the behaviors that all leaders display? So I partnered with my dear friend, Rich Deviney, who's a retired Navy SEAL commander, brilliant author and great friend. And my working definition of leadership is the attempt to leave the people and the world around us better than when we found it. And that is both micro, with every single interaction we have, and macro. I both think of my sort of micro interactions with you, Tim, as well as my body of work, lifetime, span of time, so that's micro, macro. And I think the two key words are attempt and better, because attempt denotes that it's an infinite game. We don't nail it all the time despite our best intention. We can pick ourselves up and brush off our shoulder or ask someone for help to pick us back up. We never arrive. We are always arriving. As soon as we think that we're done growing as a leader, we're wrong.
Yeah.
There's always more. We can grow as a leader and human being until our last breath, which is a pretty both morbid and I think inspiring idea. So that's the attempt piece. The better is we choose to follow others because we make up a story that us attaching ourselves to them or us following them will lead to a better outcome for us, whether it's safety, security, certainty, control, prosperity, whatever is important to you, right? Alignment with your values and beliefs. Because of the way that they behave and make decisions, you go, yep, I want to follow them. And it can definitely be for selfish reasons because we're human. It can also be for selfless reasons because we're human. So that's the dynamic. And that's the sort of, they offer a better version and vision of the future that we go, yep, I want to contribute toward that.
What do you say to, I don't know how many of our listeners would fall into this category, but imagine the ultra business, profit solely focused, very transactional business owner who would say to you upon hearing that, I am looking for leaders that will maximize profits at the end of every quarter, and I actually don't care whether people are better or not. So I reject your definition of leadership because who cares about that? I'm looking at the end result of the organization that I measure by money. Now, I realize that I'm stating it as harshly as I possibly can. What do you say to somebody if they say, yeah, that's my pushback against your definition?
My one-word answer would be cool. Good luck to you. Let me know how it goes, or I don't care to know how it goes. Now, let's say I'm in a workshop or a keynote and this comes up as a question. What I would say is, okay, cool. You really care about maximizing results. Do you know how you get results? Because if you only focus on the outputs, you're not focusing on the inputs. Mm-hmm. And though not all of Milton Friedman's ideas were wrong, I think this one was, which was he theorized in 1978 that the responsibility of business is to maximize profit and shareholder value while staying within the bounds of the law and ethical custom. Low bar. I prescribe more to the Adam Smith invisible hand version of economics and business, which is a service-oriented model. Offer value. And the way that you maximize profit, results, innovation, longevity is leaders show up to serve their people. And the more senior you get, typically the further away you are from the customer, especially in large, complex organizations. But if you show up as a leader, first of all, if you aren't serving, you aren't leading. You're just simply in charge and have authority and have the title, right? But if you show up as a leader, this is why I harp against the term servant leadership, because if you ain't serving, you ain't leading. So it's just leadership. If you show up to serve the people around you are more likely to want to serve and support each other and collaborate and form bonds of trust and cooperation, which always leads to innovation and creativity and ingenuity and finding better and smarter ways to make money over the long term. If people feel cared for, they will then extend that care to the customer, and then the customer takes care of the business. That's the value chain and the cyclical nature of how an organization should run.
I feel like such an important word that was just in the midst of that as you were talking is the word long-term. Because I think there are 1,000 ways in very opposite directions of what you just said to maximize a result in the short term. I kind of joke with people, if you tell me to, go out to the storage area and unload those pallets, and I say, Shed, I don't feel like doing that. And then you pull a baseball bat out from underneath your desk and you're like, hey, Tim, I'd like you to go unload those pallets. I'm like, absolutely, Shed. That sounds like a great idea. In that moment, the baseball bat leadership method worked, but only for the short term, because obviously at the first moment I get a chance to go work for somebody else who doesn't lead with a baseball bat, I'm going to do that. So I think the context of whether you want to call it infinite game thinking or long-term or sustainable over time, it really does, I think, change the calculus and the discussion on what we mean when we're talking about leadership.
Which is also why we need to acknowledge public companies and we need to acknowledge private equity backed 5 to 7 year horizons. Like, we just need to call a spade, that if you put a good human or a great leader in a system that is working against them, it becomes harder. It's not impossible, but it becomes harder. And so I just think, it would be naive for us not to acknowledge that there are forces, human-made forces, that are working against infinite-minded and long-term thinking. It is no excuse, just as, a sports player wouldn't blame injury, they would take accountability.
Yeah.
But we still need to acknowledge that there are headwinds for many leaders based on the context that they're in.
But it's really interesting as you bring up publicly traded and private equity backed companies. It's such a burden to have to report progress in these short windows when you're trying to consider such a balancing act, and the market is pretty unforgiving. The board of directors can be very unforgiving because they don't want to lose their spots either. But then you go into, okay, they'll take us out of publicly traded. Let's go to some private equity here. And there are very few private equity companies who are willing to make long-term investments in high-level leadership development. I know they exist. They're just rare. And to your point, there are forces involved. If I have to have such a short window, it's going to limit our options, and usually, in my experience, limits the deep investment in leadership development.
Simon Sinek actually highlights one in The Infinite Game, which is Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's firm. They invested in American Airlines. It was the first commercial airline that they had ever invested in. And Doug Parker, who is their CEO, very publicly said, I view that 80% of my shareholders are gamblers and 20% are investors. And I only make decisions for the 20%, which is great courage. And that's infinite-minded thinking. They gave their unionized employees, pilots, mechanics, the whole lot, an industry-breaking raise, only to not only be matched, but surpassed by their competitors. And so the cynical tens of thousands employee population went, what a jerk. He gave us a raise early so he didn't have to do that raise, which wasn't fact, right? It was just the perception. And so he calls up the investment manager at Berkshire Hathaway and says, I need to break the union contract and match that raise. To which they said, of course, do it. That's the right thing to do. And I'm not saying Berkshire Hathaway is perfect, but I think it's just one example of not the right balance sheet choice, but definitely the right morale and long-term choice.
Well, as you and Rich were working on this definition of leadership, after we come out of our definition here that has these two really important words of attempt and better, what were the behavioral attributes that you and Rich landed on as you're thinking about this definition of leadership?
So this is when I really leaned in to Rich and his work. So Rich has written a book called The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. So Rich had a problem, which was he led an elite SEAL team. And the attrition when trying out to become a SEAL is 90%. 9 out of 10 people who try out to become a SEAL don't make it. And then this is some Yogi Berra math. Of the 10% that make it, 50% then make it on to elite teams. And so you already have sort of the best of the best, and then you're denying 50% of the best, saying, sorry, you don't make the cut for this team. And so his team was getting a bad reputation because they were turning people down in a way, but they weren't giving them good answers. And it wasn't that they didn't have the skills, they didn't have the right human attributes to fit and add their specific team culture and context. And so Rich endeavored to identify, it's not like you have to be a good swimmer. They're all good swimmers. It's not like you have to be a good shot. They all have a good shot. But what were the attributes? And so he's written this book now more so for how to help any individual or team, whether military or any organization, design cultures that optimize for performing at our best. And so Rich, more than most, understands what it means to lead and has seen some great leaders talk about a high-performing and high-trust organization. And so I went to Rich, and I have like a 90-minute conversation with him that's recorded that I love. And we went through about 15 different attributes: curiosity, open-mindedness, courage, vulnerability, humility, accountability, service orientation, authenticity, empathy, care, confidence, compassion, decisiveness. And we went through all of those and we decided that only 3 of them are absolutely essential. The others are nice to haves. And I mean, I'm willing to accept any challenge to an arm wrestle here. If you go, no, this one's required in my context. And I'm like, cool, you win, like all good. And so the list we got to, and there's a specific order to it, and they're the last 3 I mentioned. It's decisiveness, compassion, and confidence. Decisiveness is the ability to make decisions in an appropriate time horizon and effectively, sometimes with limited data. The reason decisiveness is number 1 is because we are a tangible species and we evaluate people on their tangible decisions and behaviors that we can see, feel, and know. And so based on a leader's decisions, you either go, yep, I'm following them, or nope, I'm getting away as quick as I can, or I will do the bare minimum out of fear or necessity, keep my head low because of that baseball bat, and get the heck out of here as quick as I can, right? Making decisions doesn't mean you need to make it on your own. You can still collaborate and get data. As well, intentionally saying, I am not making a decision on this right now for this reason, can still be a decision as long as it's communicated. Compassion is number 2. And when we make decisions that include and consider the feelings and ideas of others, we are making decisions that are also compassionate. It doesn't mean that I need to make every right decision and bend myself into a pretzel to ensure that every single person around me is satisfied. But I do need to show up and behave in a way that others feel that they are heard, that they are considered, and that they matter, even if I'm disappointing them. And so compassion is the ability to show and connect with others and make them feel and believe that you understand how they feel. Compassion is far more cerebral. I've heard it called like cognitive empathy, but now we're just, I think, getting way too academic. The reason I didn't include empathy is because we cannot have empathy for all human beings at all time. One example is I've had a front row seat to my wife returning from 2 mat leaves, but I'll never have a firsthand experience of that.
That's true.
And so the best I can muster is compassion. I can try to do some work to figure out when is a time that I felt like I was returning from work after a year off, 18 months off, whatever, but I've never done that. So compassion. And when we make compassionate decisions, people feel heard, considered, that they matter.
All right. Let's go to 3.
So 3 is confidence, and like the best version of confidence. Actually lean into your work on inwardly sound and others focus. So inwardly sound to me means I know my instrument. I know the tunes and keys and tones and songs that I should rock. I know how to best harmonize with others. I also know the tunes, keys, tones, and songs I should not be playing because I'm a fallible human being that has limitations and weaknesses. And so the confidence piece for me is the inwardly sound. It's the best version of confidence. It is not arrogance. It is, I think, impossible to sustainably follow an insecure leader, but we follow confident leaders. And in fact, insecure leaders are dangerous.
I want to come back to decisiveness just a little bit. Of the 3, when you think about decisiveness, is it kind of seeing the whole picture and being able to make wise choices around that? Or how do you, if we unpack that one just a bit more, how do you see that one?
So a couple things. So one is the ability to make a call when a call needs to be made.
I mean, you could connect that to confidence, right?
Yep. Well, they're all interrelated. But the other thing is like the words I use, that's a decision.
Yeah.
I see that you're frustrated with something that's going on with the team. Do I ignore it or do I have a one-on-one conversation? That's a decision. So it's a little bit of a cheat code because it's like everything, like every human behavior is a decision. So yes, it includes the, do we take on that M&A partner? Yes, it includes the, do we lay people off or do a temporary 2-week furlough or everyone, like it's those big decisions, but it's also the micro every moment decisions. Do I roll my eyes or do I connect? And the way to get better at it is to just make more decisions. So if you're like, I'm not really good at making decisions, start small. Like, what's for dinner tonight? Make a call. And is it a compassionate call? And is it a confident call? Or is it like, we're having sushi and you're 6-year-old's like, I hate sushi. Like, maybe not the best call. So work on it in low stakes environments and see if you can get better at it.
All right, I'm going to go into full hammer mode now. In hammer in search of a nail. So, when I look at this set of 3, I would lean to put decision making into the category of what leaders do. And now we go to the next layer below. Compassion is about who you are, others focused. You've already identified confidence as inwardly sound. And here we have, again, for the 1 millionth time in my life, you've narrowed it down to 3 things. 2/3 of them are about who you are as a person.
The only pushback I'll lean into Rich's definitions of attributes, which all attributes, I think, are about who we are. I think there's a distinction between decision making and decisiveness.
Okay.
There are some of us who are naturally or who have developed the human attribute of being decisive, which is, I'm going to make a call. Now, I also think decisiveness does marry well with accountability, because if I make a call and it doesn't go well, or if I make a call and I realize, oops, wrong call, I'm now making a new call, it marries well. I add accountability as my own. If I'm hiring someone or I'm promoting someone, or if I'm wanting to work with someone, I will only follow them or hire them or choose to do business with them if they're also accountable. I'm just pointing out that there are very clear examples of leaders that people follow who are not accountable.
We have to get together again because there is so much good stuff that you put out into the world that is wise and helpful and true. But as we wrap up this time,
yes,
and we think about kind of where we visited here, share with us just a couple of concluding thoughts as you think about our conversation here today.
As a leader, your whisper is a shout and your tiptoes are stomps. Everyone is listening and watching. Now, that isn't to me a call for perfection. To me, it's a call for accountability and it's a call for progress. And just know that your words and actions bear weight. When you're in a role of leadership, all of a sudden your jokes are funnier, even though objectively they're not. And so know that the more senior you get, the more that we're biologically wired to offer you deference. And you got to work really hard to make sure that you aren't the emperor without clothes, and to work really hard to find and reward truth when it comes your way, especially when it's hard to hear.
Every time I have the opportunity to have a conversation with Shed, it is a blessing to me. Such an easy person to interact with, to learn from. And today we got a chance to hear what an incredible backstory he has through his grandfather, now into the calling of this work. And there is so much great thinking and ideas that Shed has that we didn't get to, and we're going to, because we are going to have Shed back. I can tell you that right now. So get ready for another time with Shed later on. But as we turn our attention specifically to our time together today, I want to come back to the definition of leadership. The attempt to leave the people and world around us better than when we found them. That's a really interesting thought, and I think it is challenging. It's challenging to me because as the leader of this business or a leader in my family, I can get so caught up in getting things done. And to be sure, we need to get things done. But if that's my only thought, if I'm not thinking about how in the midst of getting things done, are we leaving things better? Are we leaving people better? If I'm not thinking about that, then I will probably miss on that opportunity. And with that, I'll miss on the much bigger picture, longer term impact that I can have as a leader. And I don't want to miss on that. So I think this definition of leadership that Shed and Rich Savini have come up with is really important, because I think it is grounding, it's level setting. It catches us and really asks us the question, are we getting too caught up in just getting things done? And that leads me to the question I want to leave you with today. And that is this. In the midst of getting things done, are you as a leader focused on leaving the people you lead better than when you found them? This is Tim Spiker reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you receive your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.